This is how you cross over from Israel to Gaza, and right now we're in no man's land. Prime Minister, do you now regret when once asked what your favourite joke was, you replied, Nick Clegg? And Deputy Prime Minister, what do you think of that?
Mr. Trump, why should you be president? What makes you fit for the role? Is it just one big ego trip?
Thank you very much.
People aren't sure they can trust what you say. You say things and then it turns out that they're not quite what you said.
And if we deliver what we say we're going to deliver.
My name's Andy Bell and I've been a journalist for over 30 years. In this podcast series, How Did We Get Here?, I ask a contributor to provide context and background to a big story in the news. This week, we're in the end game of Brexit. What's gone wrong? Is there still a way through in the negotiations? And if there isn't, what does it mean for Britain? I've been talking to Catherine Barnard, Professor of EU Law at the University of Cambridge. We spoke the morning after the Prime Minister's fruitless trip to Brussels. Catherine Barnard, thanks very much for taking part in this edition of How Did We Get Here? To talk about where are we with the EU. We're talking the morning after the meeting between Boris Johnson and Ursula von der Leyen. First of all, what did you make of what happened Wednesday night?
Well, I think at one level it was quite predictable. There was no planning for a big unveiling moment and the delivery of a deal. It's quite clear, as we'd seen during the day, that the real stumbling block is over level playing fields and specifically what's increasingly known as the evolution clause, which is the requirement for the UK to keep up to date with EU rules on environmental and social matters. Boris Johnson raised it in the Commons and Angela Merkel had come up very firmly during the day as well. So we knew that that was a problem. So it was always pretty clear that the dinner was not going to be the great success that those advocating for a deal would hope.
Well, sorry, can I just jump in there? Maybe not a great success, but maybe people were hoping for just a little bit more sense that there was some room for talk still and maybe more potential for meeting of minds. They were pretty downbeat when they came out of it in the statements they issued.
I think that's true. And I mean, the word gloomy is the adjective of the day. On the other hand, it was always said that there was going to be a crisis, a moment of crisis before any deal might be signed. Now, that may be trying to clutch at straws, but I think it is striking that although it looks like the latest sort of deadline is Sunday, in fact, Dominic Raab was talking this morning and Penny Mordaunt as well, that of course the final deadline is the 31st of December. So there's clearly some sort of sense that they will keep trying. That said, the EU published today its contingency for a no-deal Brexit document. And what's striking about that document is it's clearly a reflection of the fact that the EU pretty much thinks we will be leaving on no-deal terms. OK, well, we'll come back to that. But let's go back, first of all, to perhaps now the vain hope that there might be a way through on this. And the idea that the sticking point is this issue of the level playing field. How is there... how could it be that a way could be found through on that might satisfy both sides? Because Boris Johnson says we can't sign up to the EU in the future coming up with a new law and us just having to go along with it and they punish us. But is there not wiggle room there to say, but they were also making it clear that we won't go backwards from where we are now in terms of regulations on various areas like employment law. Surely in between that, is there somewhere where an agreement can be found? You'd like to think so. And you'd like to think that even if it couldn't be negotiated formally into the text of the treaty, there could be some sort of side letters to try and express goodwill. The problem is there is a deep lack of trust on both sides, but particularly on the EU side about the UK's behaviour. And specifically the maverick behaviour over the internal market bill, which was published in September. Yes, there's a potential landing zone. Indeed, Michael Gove had already admitted that the UK was prepared to sign up to non-regression, which means that they would not reduce the standards already there. And that's particularly important over things like the Working Time Directive, which the UK has always had a difficult relationship with.
I mean, you mentioned the internal market bill there. Just to remind people, that was the idea that Britain said, we're prepared to break international law essentially to override parts of the deal done on the withdrawal agreement.
Exactly. So the internal market bill has essentially two limbs to it. The first bit is to build an internal market for the UK. And the second bit, which was added very late in the day,
essentially, as Brandon Lewis said, enabled the UK to break international law in a limited and specific way, specifically some of the provisions on the Northern Ireland Protocol.
But we did abandon that, or the UK government did abandon that this week. So didn't that rebuild goodwill? You'd hope it might have done.
A bit, but of course that is after the damage had been done. I think there was profound shock that a country which has long been regarded as an upholder of the rule of law and rule abiding should do something, or be prepared to do something as radical as be prepared to break international law. And indeed, there is an argument that even by introducing those clauses, the UK was already in breach of the good faith provisions in the withdrawal agreement, the divorce text.
OK, so now to go back to the free trade talks. Is it the case now, do you think, that it is the UK government that has to make a move if we're going to see a way through, and specifically when it comes to this idea of the level playing field?
Well, a bit of both, because if the reports are correct that the EU wants to be able to unilaterally impose tariffs on the UK if it's deemed that the UK has breached those level playing field conditions, the fact it is asymmetrical would suggest that the UK has something to complain about. But that is a big if, because we just haven't seen the text, so we just don't know, but that's what's being reported. So there, you could say that the EU needs to move so that the UK can complain about the EU's behaviour. The trouble is the EU probably just wouldn't countenance that, or the Court of Justice wouldn't countenance that, because it would be the UK trying to take a view on EU law.
I mean, are we getting to the stage now? And you've mentioned already the side deals, as it were, the contingencies published by the EU today, where it's now looking more like everyone is just accepting that we are going to no deal. Because, dare I say, even just not very long ago, you were feeling it was slightly more hopeful that there would be a deal.
Yeah, I mean, certainly the way things are heading at the moment, it doesn't look like there's going to be a deal. But what we need to watch out for is whether businesses are prepared to come out in the next few days, whether any politicians are prepared to put their heads above the parapet to say, actually, the damage to the economy is so great that we absolutely need a deal. But if both sides have become so entrenched over this, then there is a good chance that we will leave with a no deal in the start of January. But what's interesting is that the Commission's contingency measures does foresee some sort of negotiations into next year. But it's very difficult to see how they will succeed where the current negotiations have failed, because we go round and round in the same circles, because the same issues will be the relevant ones.
And just to remind us, the basic sort of clash of principles here is sovereignty versus compliance with the single market rules. Exactly.
Access to the single market. And remember, the access that we're getting is going to be significantly reduced to what we had as a full member. And of course, the EU feels that's very strongly, because you can't get the benefits of membership if you're no longer in the club. But we will have tariff-free access to the EU single market. And therefore, we've got to bind our hands to an extent in respect of subsidies, employment law and environmental protection. And so far, the UK is not prepared to stomach it.
I mean, what happened to all the statements about how this was going to be the easiest trade deal done, and how obviously the EU will want to continue selling Mercedes and Prosecco and cheese to us, and will therefore essentially allow access to the single market? I mean, there were a lot of promises and claims made over the last few years.
I'm afraid it was made by people who hadn't understood the detail, hadn't understood how difficult this was, who hadn't put themselves in the shoes of the EU, and hadn't understood that for the key players on the EU side, particularly Angela Merkel, the need to preserve the integrity of the single market trumped any deal with the United Kingdom.
Shouldn't the EU, though, be recognising its own interests and saying, actually, we do want our cars to be sold in Britain. This is a terrifically important market and a big economy. Is the EU slightly cutting off its nose to spite its face on this?
Yeah, you could argue that. But remember, although we're talking about the EU, in fact, these would be German cars or Italian cars. So the pain is spread across a number of member states. and some member states are largely unaffected by Brexit. The state that's most affected by Brexit is, of course, Ireland.
Well, that's, again, a whole other issue. I mean, I know that the Irish have been trying to remind some of their European colleagues that there's big issues, not just because of the way so much is transported physically to get to Ireland through the UK, but also the aspect of peace, not to put too fine a point on it. Are the Irish going to end up in a very difficult position with this?
Yes, and indeed all the modelling suggests that the damage to the Irish economy will be almost as great as the damage to the UK economy by having a no-deal Brexit.
And yet, that seems to be where we're heading, or that the other partners in the EU and the EU Commission are prepared to take that decision.
That's right. But it looks like Ireland will get some more money. They will use the budget to help out the states which are particularly affected. There's going to be a Brexit adjustment reserve, which will help the regions and sectors most affected by Brexit.
You mentioned them already, the kind of provision agreement or contingency planning that the EU has talked about and is bringing forward. A lot of that looks like it could ease the initial pain if we just crash into January the 1st. I mean, thinking about aviation and road haulage, that kind of thing. Does that look right to you?
That's right. So there are three areas where the EU is prepared to make unilateral concessions, although it's not quite as unilateral as would first appear. So aviation, road transport and rail transport going through the Channel Tunnel, and fishing. But note, even if the EU is prepared to make these concessions, it's on condition that the UK carries on respecting, wait for it, the level playing field.
So it's not just something that can come in on January the 1st and everyone can kind of keep going. Britain has to sign up to the things that it says it doesn't want to sign up to.
Exactly. Now, remember, it will only be for 2 months or 6 months, so it's very short periods of time. And in reality, the UK will not be spending the first 2 months of 2021 ripping up all of EU employment law. So it's at one level, it's quite an easy thing to agree to. But of course, at another level, it's, as you've just pointed out, the very thing that the UK won't accept as part of the trade deal. And there is a perversity about all of this, that there seems to be really quite limited intention on the part of the UK to rip up the laws in those areas. So the question is why the principle is absolutely prevailing over the practice when the economic damage will be so great. The answer must be sovereignty, but the bottom line is the economic harm will be quite significant.
Again, we'll come back to that in a moment, but I just want one of the last aspects of what the EU is proposing in terms of contingencies is fishing. And already that sounds pretty unacceptable to the UK government, because the EU is basically saying we'll carry on as we are for another year. Yeah,
absolutely. And subject to reciprocity. So EU vessels can enter UK waters, UK vessels can enter EU waters. But whether the UK is going to be prepared for that, it's not clear at all.
Okay, so, I mean, as you say, we've got to the stage where it seems the principles of sovereignty are trumping the practical effects. And that, presumably, on the UK side is about politics. But Boris Johnson could probably get a deal through the House of Commons with Labour votes. So in the politics of it, if he were to come up with something, couldn't he, he could win the vote he needed, even if he had a number of people on his own side saying this is a betrayal of Brexit?
Yeah, he could. But I suspect the internal party management of this will be very difficult indeed if he's reliant on Labour votes to get the deal through. And of course, he's worried about a leadership bid if there are sufficient members of his own party who don't like what he is doing. And indeed, they might launch a leadership bid as a way of spiking his guns, particularly if he's reliant on Labour votes to get the deal through.
OK, so, all right, well, they say they're going to carry on for a little while longer. I mean, but just spell it out for us. If there is no deal, no trade agreement, how damaging is that to the UK economy?
Well, the damage is significant. I mean, if you look at what the Bank of England have forecast. They say it's probably a sort of 4% or so hit to GDP. Other forecasters say it's an 8% hit to GDP. Now, the trouble is this doesn't mean very much to people. And people say, well, look, the economy will recover and will take advantage of these new trading opportunities. But in the short to medium term, the hit will be large, particularly if COVID continues to rampage across the country. And particularly, we have to go into a further lockdown in January following the Christmas opening up.
Keir Starmer quoted Boris Johnson back to him when he said this would be a failure of statesmanship if they couldn't do a deal. What do you think of that?
I agree. There has been appetite throughout to do a deal. Of course, the internal politics signs have suggested against. But if you were focused on the economy, the only rational response is to do a deal. And the EU is our largest trading partner. And just to give you a sort of sense of the order of magnitude, 43% of our trade in goods is with the EU. So it's about 250 billion pounds worth of trade in goods with the EU. The hope of doing a trade deal with Australia would increase our trade with Australia by 900 million, which is just a drop in the ocean compared to the consequences of having tariff access of British goods to the EU market.
I spoke to you not long ago, and you put the chances of a deal a little bit better than 50-50. Sounds like you've kind of gone back a little bit on that.
I think that's true, just because last night was gloomy, to use the words, but I haven't given up all hope. And there may be, if you've got a combination of business and political forces in the UK really trying to push the Prime Minister into doing a deal. But the bottom line is that at the moment, we're not seeing people like Rishi Sunak, who you would expect to be making the case for a deal Brexit, given the economic harm and given just the level of our indebtedness following the huge expenditure in respect of COVID. But he's not making that case. Indeed, he's been virtually silent on Brexit.
Something to do with politics and the politics of the Conservative Party, I imagine. Final question, but if we don't end up with a deal in the next few days, do we just all end up coming back for more talking next year?
We do, but probably from a position of greater weakness. And indeed, that's what the EU is anticipating, that they really hold our feet to the fire for the first 6 months or so. We see how bad it is, and then we come back begging for more. I suspect that's what the EU is planning, indeed there are hints to that effect in the contingency planning document that's published today. And also there's a stark warning in that document to the member states. Basically, the EU is saying member states do not try and come up with bilateral deals with the UK because you feel sorry for the UK or you want to help the UK. That is not acceptable to the EU. And indeed, in particularly strong language, it says almost in the last paragraphs of the text, it says, at any rate, the EU collectively has a stronger bargaining power than each member state acting alone. That bargaining power benefits all member states. It must be used to ensure a level playing field between the EU and the UK. Bottom line is, EU is big, the UK is smaller, and the EU thinks it has the upper hand.
Professor Catherine Barnard, for those hoping for a deal, that's a pretty gloomy, as we've said, the word of the day, assessment. But thank you very much for talking to us. Thanks very much.
Thank you for your time.
Catherine Barnard. If you have ideas on this or for any other podcast, you can email me on andy.bell@itn.co.uk. And I'm tweeting it at AndyBell5News. And please share, rate and review. Thanks for listening to this edition of How Did We Get Here? There'll be another along soon.